"Go beg on the street, you old beggar." My son, Kevin, shouted at me as I tried to sit down at the restaurant table. I took a deep breath, signaled the waiter, and calmly replied, "All right, but then you'll have to leave." The words left my mouth with a calm that surprised even me. All the guests at the Gilded Lily turned to look at us. Kevin froze. His face turned beet red with shame. His wife, Stephanie, dropped her wine glass onto the white tablecloth. What my son didn't know was who I really was. My name is Deborah. I'm 65 years old, and that evening, everything was about to change forever. But let me tell you how I got to this moment. Because what happened after my words was something no one, truly no one, had expected. It all started 3 hours earlier when Kevin called me, "Mom, I want to invite you to dinner at the best restaurant in the city. I have something to celebrate, and I want you to be there." His voice sounded different, almost mocking, but as always, I wanted to believe that my son finally wanted me to be part of his successful life. That evening, I got ready with great care. I put on my best dress, an emerald green one I had bought years ago but barely worn. I carefully combed my hair, applied light makeup, and even wore my mother's pearl rings. I wanted to look presentable for my successful son. Kevin had achieved a lot of success in recent years. He was a regional manager at a large corporation. He owned a large house in the most exclusive neighborhood, and his wife, Stephanie, always wore very expensive clothes. But towards me, his own mother, he became increasingly cold and distant. I arrived promptly at 8 p.m. at the Gilded Lily. It was a very elegant establishment with white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and waiters in tuxedos. A place where a single dinner costs more than $200 per person. A place I knew very well, even though Kevin had no idea. When I asked for Kevin Smith's table, the waiter, Anton, scrutinized me from head to toe. My green dress, though it was my best, seemed modest compared to the elegant suits of the other ladies dining there. "Certainly, Miss Smith, please follow me," he said with a professional smile. I followed him between the tables, feeling curious glances on me. Some people whispered to each other, probably wondering what a woman like me was doing in such an exclusive place. Kevin was already sitting at a table in the center with Stephanie. She wore a very expensive red dress and jewelry that sparkled under the restaurant lights. As I approached, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was no chair for me. "Hello, my boy," I said with a forced smile, hoping he would stand up to hug me or at least explain where I should sit. Kevin looked at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, Mom, you're here." He didn't stand up. He didn't greet me warmly. Stephanie didn't even look up from her plate. "And my chair?" I asked, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "Your chair, Kevin." He laughed, but it wasn't a joyful laugh. It was cruel, merciless. "Mom, I didn't invite you for dinner. I asked you to come so you could see how successful people live, so you could understand the difference between you and us." I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. The people at nearby tables began to pay more attention to us. "My boy, I don't understand," I murmured, trying to maintain my dignity. "You don't understand?" Kevin raised his voice. "Mom, look at yourself. Look at this place. Do you really think you belong here? We come here every week. Dinner here costs more than you spend in an entire month." Stephanie finally spoke without looking up from her food. "Kevin, don't be so harsh. Your mother can't help it that she's like that." Those words hurt me more than my own son's. The humiliation was so strong that I felt tears in my eyes. But there was something they didn't know. Something I had kept secret all these years. And that evening, that secret was about to be revealed in the most spectacular way. "Kevin, please," I whispered, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "I just wanted to spend some time with you. We haven't spoken as mother and son in months." My son leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed, as if enjoying my discomfort. "Talk. What should we talk about, Mom? About your boring life? About how you spend your days watching soap operas in your small apartment?" The people at nearby tables no longer pretended not to hear our conversation. An elegant couple at the next table exchanged pitying glances about me. I felt the heat rising in my neck, but but something inside me told me to remain calm. My boy, I work hard. I've always worked hard to make ends meet, Kevin, I replied, trying to maintain my dignity. It's true, I don't have much money, but I have my pride. Stephanie snickered contemptuously. Pride, Deborah, forgive me. But what can you be proud of? You live in a 2-bedroom apartment, take the bus everywhere, and buy your clothes at thrift stores. Every word was like a stab, but what hurt me the most was the satisfied smile on my son's face. How had he become such a cruel person? Where was the sweet boy I had raised with so much love? Mom, Kevin continued, raising his voice so even more people could hear him. The truth is, I'm embarrassed to introduce you as my mother. Look at Stephanie. Look how she dresses, how she talks, how she behaves. That's the kind of woman who suits someone like me. Stephanie smiled contentedly, running her hand through her dyed blonde hair. Her red dress must have cost more than $1,000, and her shoes were from an Italian brand I knew very well, too well. Stephanie comes from an important family, Kevin continued. Her father owns 3 car dealerships. She studied at a private university, speaks 3 languages, and understands business. And what can you teach me, how to survive on $800 a month? Tears threatened to stream from my eyes, but I held them back. There was something Kevin didn't know, something Stephanie didn't know either, something no one in my family knew, and that evening, it was about to change their lives forever. The waiter, Anton, discreetly approached our table. I had known him for years, even if he couldn't say anything at that moment. He looked at me with a worried expression in his eyes. Would you like to order anything else? He asked politely. No, thank you, Kevin replied curtly. My mother won't be dining with us. In fact, I think it's time for her to leave. But my boy, I murmured, I thought you said you wanted to celebrate something with me. Kevin laughed again. Celebrate with you, Mom? I want to celebrate my promotion, my new position, my successful life. Do you think I want to celebrate that with someone who reminds me where I come from? Stephanie and I belong to a different social class than you. Kevin is right, Stephanie added, taking a sip of her wine, which cost $50 a bottle. We go to places like this because we can afford it. We have the money, the education, and the social class to be here. It's nothing personal against you, Deborah, but there are differences you can't ignore. I looked around the restaurant. It was truly beautiful. The crystal chandeliers glowed softly, the paintings on the walls were original artworks, and the piano music created a perfect atmosphere. Every detail had been carefully chosen to create the most elegant experience. This restaurant is really beautiful, I remarked quietly. Of course, it's beautiful, Kevin replied with arrogance. It's the most expensive in the entire city. The wait time for a table here is 3 months. But if you have money and connections like we do, doors open. Stephanie nodded. We know the manager, the chef, and even the owner. Well, Kevin knows the owner personally, which is why we always get the best table. A small smile appeared on my lips. If only they knew the truth about who really knew the owner of this restaurant. Mom, why are you smiling like that? Kevin looked at me suspiciously. Do you find it funny that I'm explaining how the real world works? No, my boy, I replied calmly. I was just thinking about something. About what? About how you're right about some things. Indeed, there are differences one cannot ignore. Differences you don't know, but which will become very clear this evening. Kevin and Stephanie exchanged a confused glance. The tone of my voice had changed. I no longer sounded like the humble and submissive mother they knew. What are you talking about? Stephanie asked with a certain unease. Before I could answer, another waiter approached the table. It was the restaurant manager, Mr. Brand. A distinguished man in his 50s with an impeccable suit and refined manners. Good evening, he greeted politely. Is everything all right at your table? Kevin straightened in his chair, obviously pleased by the manager's attention. Everything's perfect, Mr. Brand. As always, the service is exceptional. Mr. Brand smiled professionally, but when his eyes met mine, I noticed a small spark of recognition. He knew who I was. Of course, he did. I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Brand replied. Then he looked directly at me. Miss Smith, are you enjoying your visit this evening? The question seemed innocent, but there was more to it. Kevin didn't notice, but I did. Mr. Brand was waiting for my signal. Mr. Brand, I said with a firm voice. I think it's time you spoke with the owner. There's a situation here that requires his immediate attention. Mr. Brand nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for those words all night. Certainly, Miss Smith, the owner will be right here. Kevin frowned, visibly confused by the conversation. Owner, what are you talking about? Mom, do you know the manager of this place? Stephanie also looked confused. Deborah, how do you know Mr. Brand? I smiled but didn't answer. I just waited. The next few minutes would be the most important in my life and definitely the most shocking for my son. Meanwhile, Kevin addressed Mr. Brand with his typical arrogance. Listen, Mr. Brand, I don't know what's going on here, but my mother has been a bit confused lately. Sometimes she says things that don't make sense. Old age, you know. Mr. Brand maintained his professional smile but said nothing. His silence only increased the tension at the table. Why don't you answer? Kevin insisted. Do you truly know your mother, young man? Mr. Brand replied cautiously. I think it's better to wait for the owner. He will be able to clear up all your doubts. Stephanie leaned closer to Kevin and whispered, This is very strange. Your mother is acting odd. Do you think she's in her right mind? Her words were loud enough for me to hear. But instead of hurting me, they gave me more strength, because I knew that in a few minutes, she would swallow every single one of those words. The people at nearby tables had noticed the attention. Some guests had stopped eating to discreetly observe what was happening. The murmur of conversations had quieted, as if the entire restaurant were waiting for something. Kevin grew impatient. Mom, this is ridiculous. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's over. Stephanie and I want to enjoy our dinner in peace. In peace, I repeated. My voice grew steadily firmer. Like the peace you've given me all these years. Like the peace I've received when my own son treated me like a stranger. Stop. Kevin shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The glasses clinked, and several people turned completely to look at us. You're making a scene, you're embarrassing me in front of all these important people. Stephanie placed her hand on Kevin's arm. Calm down, darling. People are looking at us. Exactly. Kevin stood up. His face was red with anger. Mom, I'm going to ask you to leave now. You're ruining my evening, my celebration, my reputation. I remained seated, completely calm. Your reputation? The reputation of someone who treats his own mother like garbage. You're not garbage. Kevin yelled, but his tone said the opposite. You're just different from us. You belong in a different world, a world of simple people, of people without ambition, of people who are content with little. The words echoed through the entire restaurant. An uncomfortable silence spread. Even the waiters had stopped their activities to observe the scene. Stephanie also stood up. Deborah, please. Kevin is right. This isn't your place. Look around. See how the other people are looking at you. They're looking at you with pity. She was right about something. People were looking at me, but not with pity. There was something else in their expressions. Curiosity, anticipation, as if they knew something important was about to happen. Do you know how much this dinner costs, Mom? Kevin continued, gesturing to the table. $300 just for what we've had so far. That's more than you spend on food in an entire month. And do you know how much the wine you're drinking costs? I added calmly. $50 a bottle, a Burgundy, an excellent choice. Kevin looked at me in surprise. How do you know that? Because I know this place well, my boy. Very well. Stephanie laughed. You know this place well? Since when? Since you've been looking at the menu from outside. Her comment elicited a few nervous chuckles from nearby tables, but I remained unperturbed. At that moment, a familiar figure approached our table. It was a man in his 60s, distinguished, with a perfectly fitted grey suit and an aura that immediately commanded respect. Mr. Brand followed closely behind him. Kevin recognized him immediately. "Dr. Peterson," he exclaimed with a fawning smile. "What an honor to see you here. I'm Kevin Smith. I believe we met briefly at the business conference last year." Dr. Peterson nodded politely. "Yes, I vaguely recall," but his eyes were fixed on me. "Good evening, Deborah." The way he spoke my name made Kevin freeze. It wasn't the greeting of a successful businessman to an ordinary, elderly lady. It was the greeting of someone who knew me well. Very well. "Good evening, Charles," I replied casually. "I'm sorry you had to come here because of this." Stephanie looked at Kevin, completely confused. "How does your mother know Dr. Peterson?" Kevin stammered. I don't know. Mom, how do you know Dr. Peterson?" Dr. Peterson stepped closer to the table, and his presence silenced all the nearby guests. "Miss Smith," he said formally, "is there a problem I should resolve?" The formal way he addressed me as Miss Smith made Kevin frown even more. Why was such an important man speaking to me with so much respect? "Yes. There is a problem," I replied clearly. "My son and his wife have severely insulted me. They have publicly humiliated me in this restaurant, told me I don't belong here, and asked me to leave." Dr. Peterson nodded gravely. "I understand. And what would you like me to do about this?" Kevin interrupted desperately. "Wait, Dr. Peterson. There's a misunderstanding. My mother is exaggerating. I merely explained to her that this place is a bit too sophisticated for her." Dr. Peterson turned to Kevin with a cold expression. "Too sophisticated for her? You're telling your mother she has no right to be in this restaurant?" "That's not how it is," Kevin protested. "It's just that, well, she can't afford dinner here. She lives on barely $800 a month. This is beyond her means." Stephanie nodded vigorously. "Exactly. We weren't cruel, just realistic. This place costs a fortune." Dr. Peterson looked at me again. "Is that true, Deborah? Can you not afford dinner here?" A slow smile spread across my face. It was the moment I had waited years for. The moment my son would discover who his mother really was. "Well, Charles," I said, standing up from my chair, "that depends on how you look at it." I pulled an envelope from my purse, one I had carried with me for months, hoping for the perfect moment to use it. I placed it on the table directly in front of Kevin. "What's that?" Stephanie asked suspiciously. "Open it," I said to Kevin. "Open it and read what's inside." Kevin took the envelope with trembling hands. Stephanie leaned forward to get a better view. As Kevin pulled out the documents and began to read, his face turned ashen. "No, this can't be," he murmured. "What does it say?" Stephanie asked anxiously, trying to see the documents over Kevin's shoulder. "What can't be?" Kevin read aloud with a trembling voice. "Deed of ownership, the Gilded Lily. Owner, Deborah Smith." His voice faded to a whisper. Acquisition date, March 15, 2018. The silence that followed was deafening. The people at nearby tables no longer pretended not to listen. Some had even slightly risen from their seats to get a better view of what was happening. Stephanie snatched the papers from Kevin's hands. "This must be a fake. This must be a joke, Deborah. These documents are false." Dr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Miss Stephanie, I assure you that these documents are completely authentic. Ms. Deborah Smith is indeed the owner of this restaurant, and also of 4 other restaurants in the city." 4 other restaurants? Kevin exclaimed, still in shock. "Mom, that's impossible. You live in a small apartment, you take the bus, you shop at thrift stores." I sat back down, feeling more powerful than I had in years. "That's right, my boy. I live simply because I choose to. But that doesn't mean I don't have money." "How much money?" Stephanie asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Peterson answered for me. "Miss Smith has a net worth of approximately $8 million. Her restaurants generate annual profits of nearly $2 million. Kevin sank into his chair as if he had been struck. $8 million. Why? Stephanie murmured. Why did you never tell us anything? I leaned back in my chair, looking at the shocked and confused faces of my son and his wife, because I wanted to know the true character of the people around me. I wanted to know if they would love me for who I am, and not for what I have. But Mom, Kevin stammered, I'm your son. How could you hide something like this from me? How I could hide it from you? I repeated, my voice filled with the anger I had suppressed for years. Seriously, you're asking that after everything I've heard tonight? I stood up again, and this time my posture was completely different. I was no longer the humble and submissive elderly lady. I was a successful businesswoman, a millionaire who had built an empire from the ground up. Kevin, in the last 5 years, since you became successful in your job, you've treated me as if I were a burden. You've shamed me for my appearance, my clothes, my way of life. The people at nearby tables began to murmur among themselves. Some discreetly pulled out their phones, probably to record what was happening. Do you remember Christmas last year? I continued. When you told me it was better not to come to your party because I wouldn't fit in with your important guests? Kevin flinched in his seat. Mom, Or Stephanie's birthday 6 months ago, when you told me there was a dress code and my clothes weren't appropriate for the event? Stephanie avoided my gaze, visibly uncomfortable. All this time, I continued, you assumed I was poor, that I was a burden, that I was someone to be ashamed of. And tonight, you've confirmed exactly what I suspected about you. Mr. Brand discreetly stepped closer and whispered in my ear. Miss Smith, would you like us to ask them to leave the restaurant? Before I could answer, Kevin abruptly stood up. Wait, Mom, if you have so much money, why do you live the way you do? Why didn't you tell me anything? We're family. Family. I laughed, but it wasn't a joyful laugh. Family, Kevin? 15 minutes ago you yelled at me to go beg on the street. Is that what family does? Stephanie tried to intervene. Deborah, if we had known. If you had known, I interrupted her, if you had known I had money, you would have treated me with respect. Is that your definition of family love? Conditional respect based on financial status. An approving murmur was heard from nearby tables. Obviously, the other guests were enjoying the spectacle, and many seemed to be on my side. Mom, please, Kevin pleaded. Can we discuss this at home? In private. In private. I gestured to the restaurant. Like when you publicly humiliated me a few minutes ago. When you told all these witnesses that I don't belong here. Dr. Peterson stepped closer to me. Miss Smith, as the manager of your properties, I must ask you. Would you like us to take special measures? Kevin turned desperately to Dr. Peterson. Dr. Peterson, please. She's my mother. There must be a way to sort this out. Young man, Dr. Peterson replied coolly, you have spent the last 30 minutes insulting and humiliating the owner of this establishment. Not only that, you've done it in front of dozens of witnesses. Stephanie began to cry. We didn't know. If we had known she was the owner, we never would have. Never would have what? I interrupted her. Never would have treated me disrespectfully? You only respect rich people. What kind of values are those? An elegant man at a nearby table began to slowly clap. Soon, other people joined in. It wasn't mocking applause, but a sign of admiration. They applauded my stance, my dignity, the way I was handling the situation. Kevin looked around and noticed for the first time that the entire restaurant's attention was on us. Mom, people are looking at us. Yes, they're looking at us, I confirmed. They're seeing exactly what kind of person you really are. They're seeing how you treat your own mother when you think she has nothing to offer you. But now I know you have money, Kevin said desperately. Now we know the truth. We can start fresh. Start fresh. I laughed bitterly. Now that you know I have money, you want to start fresh? Now I'm good enough to be your mother again. Stephanie wiped away her tears and tried to take my hand. Deborah, please forgive us. We didn't know. I abruptly pulled my hand away. Stephanie, an hour ago you said Kevin was ashamed to introduce me as his mother. You told me I didn't have the education, the social class, or the money to be here. Do you remember? She nodded miserably. Well, you were right about one thing. Indeed, there are differences between us that cannot be ignored, but they are not the differences you thought. I walked to the center of the restaurant, where everyone could see and hear me. My voice rose with an authority I had never shown before to my son. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, addressing the entire restaurant, I deeply regret interrupting your dinner, but I believe it is important that you, as witnesses to what has just happened, hear the whole story. An absolute silence fell over the establishment. Even the waiters paused to listen. Kevin tried to stand up to stop me, but Dr. Peterson placed a firm hand on his shoulder, forcing him to remain seated. My name is Deborah Smith, and I am the owner of this restaurant, I continued. For the past 7 years, I have regularly, but always discreetly, come here to observe how my business is run, to get to know my employees, to ensure my customers receive the best possible service. Some guests nodded, and I noticed that several now recognized me. The older lady who sometimes sat alone at the table in the corner, who always ordered the same thing and left generous tips. But tonight, I continued, I was invited here by my own son, who publicly humiliated me, insulted me, and asked me to leave, because in his opinion, I don't belong in this place. An approving murmur went through the entire restaurant. The expressions on people's faces showed a mixture of shock, outrage, and pity. Kevin abruptly stood up. Mom, stop. Don't do this. You're ruining my reputation. Your reputation? I turned to him with a cold smile. Kevin, you ruined your reputation the moment you decided it was acceptable to treat your mother like garbage in front of all these people. Stephanie tried one last time to save herself. Deborah, please understand our situation. We couldn't have known that you had money. I interrupted her. Is that really your excuse? That you didn't know I had money? Therefore, it was okay to treat me disrespectfully. An elegant woman at a nearby table spoke loudly. Exactly. Respect isn't about the money you have. It's about basic decency. Other voices chimed in approvingly. The atmosphere in the restaurant had completely changed. It was no longer an elegant, quiet dinner, but a stage for a public lesson on dignity and family respect. I turned back to Kevin and Stephanie. But now that you know the truth, let me explain exactly how things will change. Kevin looked desperate. Mom, please, can we discuss this in private? Not here. Not in front of all these people. Why not here? I replied firmly. You had no problem humiliating me here in front of all these people. So you will hear exactly what I have to say right here. Mr. Brand stepped closer and offered me a chair in the center, as if it were a stage. I sat down elegantly, feeling for the first time in years the power and respect I deserved. Kevin, I began, in the last 5 years, since you started earning a good salary, you've completely changed. You've become arrogant, contemptuous, and you've forgotten where you come from. Mom, Don't interrupt me, my voice echoed through the entire restaurant. Now you listen. You will hear everything I have to say. Kevin sank into his chair, visibly defeated. Do you remember when you were 12 and had pneumonia? I continued. Do you remember that we didn't have health insurance, and for 2 months I worked 3 jobs to pay for your treatment? My voice broke slightly as I remembered those difficult times. I worked in an office during the day, cleaned buildings at night, and worked in a restaurant on weekends. I slept 3 hours a night to make sure you had everything you needed. The people in the restaurant listened in absolute silence. Some older women had tears in their eyes. And do you know why I did all that? I asked, looking directly at Kevin. Because I loved you, because you were my son. Not because you had money. Not because you could give me anything in return, but because a mother's love is unconditional. Stephanie began to cry again, but these were no longer tears of self-pity. She finally seemed to understand the gravity of what they had done. But you, Kevin, I continued. Your love for me turned out to be completely conditional. You only love me when it suits you. Only when I don't embarrass you, only when I fit into your image of success. An older man at a table in the background called out, "Amen, that's the truth. Tell him." The audience's approval gave me even more strength. Now let me tell you how I got my money, because it's important that you understand that it wasn't through luck or inheritance. Kevin looked up, visibly curious, despite his humiliation. After your father died when you were 15, I explained, I was left alone with a huge debt and a son to raise. But instead of sinking into self-pity, I decided to fight. I stood up again and slowly walked around the tables as I spoke. I started as a waitress in a small restaurant, but I wasn't content with that. I observed, I learned, I studied every aspect of the business, how the kitchen worked, how the finances were managed, how to deal with customers. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. Even the staff had stopped working to hear my story. After 5 years, when I had enough experience and savings, I took out a loan and bought my first small restaurant. It was a modest place in a simple neighborhood, but I made it a success. Stephanie whispered, "Is that why you know so much about restaurants?" "Precisely," I replied, "because I built this empire from the ground up, with my own hands, with my own effort. Every restaurant I bought after that was because I had proven I could make a business work." Kevin finally spoke with a broken voice. "Mom, I didn't know any of this." "You didn't know because you never asked," I countered. "You never cared about my life. All you cared about was that I didn't embarrass you in front of your successful friends." Mr. Brand stepped closer again. "Miss Smith, would you like us to proceed with the removal?" "The removal of what?" Kevin asked in a panic. I turned to him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "The removal procedure. As the owner of this establishment, I have the right to deny entry to anyone who causes a disturbance or treats other customers disrespectfully." "You can't do that," Stephanie cried. "We're family." "Family?" I laughed. "An hour ago, you told me I wasn't good enough to be part of your family. Now that you know I have money, suddenly we're family again." Spontaneous applause erupted from several tables. The guests visibly enjoyed the unfolding justice. Kevin stood up desperately. "Mom, please forgive me. Forgive us. We can change. We can be better." "You can change," I repeated. "You can be better, Kevin. The problem isn't that you can change. The problem is that you only want to change now that you know I have money." I stepped up to him and looked him directly in the eyes. "Tell me one thing, my boy. If I told you at this moment that in reality, I don't have any money, that this was all just a joke, how would you treat me? Would you ask me to leave the restaurant again?" Kevin opened his mouth to answer, but no word came out. The answer was clear in his silence. Kevin's silence was more revealing than any words. In that moment, both he and Stephanie understood that they had been completely exposed. Not only to me, but to the entire restaurant full of witnesses. "Your silence says it all, my boy," I murmured, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. "After all, you know me better than I thought." Stephanie tried one last desperate strategy. "Deborah, we can really change. Kevin has been under a lot of pressure at work lately. He's not himself." I turned to her with a cold look. "Pressure at work? Is that your excuse for treating an elderly woman poorly, for humiliating your husband's mother?" A businessman at a nearby table stood up. "Miss Smith, with all due respect, I know Kevin from work, and I can confirm that he speaks about you in the same way he treated you tonight. He always refers to you as my poor mother, or the burden I have to bear." Kevin went white. "Mr. Miller, I would never." That was taken out of context. Taken out of context. Mr. Miller laughed. "Kevin, last month at the executive meeting, you literally said, 'My mother is a simple woman who doesn't understand my standard of living. Sometimes it's embarrassing to have to explain why she can't accompany me to important social events.'" A murmur of indignation went through the entire restaurant. Kevin tried to deny it, but the damage was already done. "Do you see, Kevin?" I said in a calm voice. "It's not just about tonight. It's about how you truly think about me. It's about the shame you feel for your own mother." I turned back to the entire restaurant. Ladies and gentlemen, 4 years I have watched my son become a person I don't recognize. A person who values outward appearances more than feelings. A person who is ashamed of his roots. I slowly walked to the large window of the restaurant, from which one could see the entire illuminated city. Do you see this city out there? I started at the very bottom, in the poorest neighborhoods. I washed dishes, cleaned tables, served people who sometimes treated me poorly, but I never lost my dignity. I turned to Kevin, who stood with his head bowed, completely defeated. And yet my own son, my own flesh and blood, has humiliated me more in recent years than any stranger ever has. Stephanie began to cry louder. Deborah, please give us a chance. We can go to family therapy. We can fix this. Family therapy? I laughed bitterly. Stephanie, do you really think this can be resolved with therapy? Do you think years of contempt and humiliation can be cured with a few sessions? Mr. Brand discreetly stepped closer. Miss Smith, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are several journalists outside. It seems someone has spread the story on social media. Should I keep them away? Kevin abruptly stood up. Journalists. Mom, this will ruin my career. My boss will find out. Everyone at my company will know what happened. Now you're worried about your career? I replied firmly. You weren't when you yelled at me in front of the whole restaurant. This is different. Kevin cried desperately. That was a private conversation among family. Private. I gestured to the full restaurant. You yell at your mother in a public restaurant and call it a private conversation? Mr. Miller intervened again. Kevin, I'm sorry to say this, but several employees from our company are dining here tonight. The story has already reached the company. Your behavior will be reviewed by HR. Kevin sank into his chair as if he had been struck. No, this can't be. My career, my reputation. Your reputation, I repeated slowly. You ruined it yourself the moment you decided it was acceptable to treat your mother like garbage. Stephanie tried to take Kevin's hand, but he pushed it away abruptly. All of this is your fault, he yelled at her. You convinced me my mother was a burden. You told me to be ashamed of her. My fault. Stephanie stood up indignantly. You were the one who constantly complained about her. I only supported you. And there it was. The truth finally came out. They hadn't just humiliated me tonight, they had spoken ill of me for years, reinforcing each other in their contempt. Stop, I said with a firm voice, stop blaming each other. You are both equally responsible. I turned to Mr. Brand. Please bring the documents. Which documents? Kevin asked, fear in his voice. Mr. Brand disappeared for a few minutes and returned with a thick folder. He opened it on the table and pulled out several papers. These, I said solemnly, are the documents that confirm that I not only own this restaurant, but a chain of 5 restaurants across the city. Stephanie stared at the papers with wide eyes. 5 restaurants? Yes, 5 restaurants. Including the Secret Garden, where you celebrated your anniversary last year. Including Ocean View Bistro, where Kevin took his important clients last month, including the Golden Terrace, where Stephanie celebrated her birthday. Kevin looked up abruptly. You own all those places? Exactly. And every time you went to those restaurants and bragged about your success, your money, your social status, you were spending money at businesses that belonged to me. The irony of the situation was lost on no one. Several guests began to laugh softly, enjoying the poetic justice of the moment. But there's something else, I continued, pulling another document from the folder. This is my current will. The silence that followed was absolute. You could even hear the clinking of forks on plates at the furthest tables. In this will, I said clearly, I have bequeathed my entire fortune to my only son, Kevin Smith. $8 million, 5 restaurants, and several properties. Kevin's eyes widened. You have bequeathed. Why do you say have bequeathed? I smiled, but it was not a joyful smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally found justice. Because this will, after tonight, after you've shown who you are, will be changed.
No.
Kevin cried, standing up so abruptly that his chair toppled over. Mom, please, I'm your only son. I'm your family. My family. I laughed. Kevin, an hour ago you told me to go beg on the street like a beggar. Is that how you treat your family? Stephanie also stood up, panic in her eyes. Deborah, please think carefully. Kevin made a mistake, but he doesn't deserve to lose his entire inheritance. A mistake. I turned to her with suppressed anger. Stephanie, do you call 5 years of constant humiliation a mistake? Do you call it a mistake when your husband systematically excluded me from his life? When he made me feel like a stranger in my own family? I walked to the center of the restaurant, where everyone could hear me clearly. My voice rose with an authority that surprised even me. Do you want to know why I chose to live simply, even though I had money? I asked the entire restaurant. Because I wanted to test something. I wanted to see if the people who said they loved me truly loved me for who I am, and not for what I have. A murmur of understanding went through the tables. People began to grasp the depth of my social experiment. For 7 years, I continued, I lived in a modest apartment, wore simple clothes, took the bus, and pretended to be a normal retiree. And do you know what I discovered? Kevin looked at me with growing fear, as if he was finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done. I discovered that my own son is ashamed of me. I discovered that he saw me as a burden. I discovered that he preferred to exclude me from his life rather than explain to his rich friends that he has a poor mother. Tears began to gather in my eyes, but my voice remained firm. Do you know what it feels like when your own son asks you not to come to his wedding because you don't fit the caliber of the event? A gasp of horror was heard from several tables. Some older women clutched their chests, visibly moved by my words. Kevin turned pale. Mom, I never said that literally.
No.
I pulled out my phone and searched through my messages. Here's a literal message from April 15, 2023. Mom, Stephanie and I have decided on a small wedding. Only close family and important friends. I think it would be better if you didn't come. The venue is very elegant, and I wouldn't want you to feel out of place. I read the message aloud so the entire restaurant could hear. The reaction was immediate, murmurs of indignation, some applause in support of me, and shocked expressions on the faces of the guests. That message doesn't say you can't come, Kevin protested desperately. Yes, it does, I continued. Furthermore, most of the guests are colleagues from work and important clients. I need to maintain a certain professional image. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Stephanie looked ashamed. Maintain a certain professional image, I repeated slowly, translated, your mother would ruin your professional image. An older man at a table in the background stood up. Miss Smith, my mother was right when she said that ungrateful sons are the worst misfortune a woman can have. Several guests applauded his comment. The atmosphere in the restaurant had completely changed. It was no longer just a spectacle. It had become a public judgment on family values. Kevin looked around the restaurant and noticed for the first time that all the attention was truly on us. Mom, please let's go home. We can discuss this in private. Home. I laughed bitterly. To which home, Kevin? To my modest apartment, which you're so ashamed of. Or to your big house in the exclusive neighborhood, where I was never welcome. Stephanie tried to intervene. Deborah, you were always welcome in our house. Welcome. I pulled out my phone again. Let me read you a few messages Stephanie sent me over the last 2 years. Stephanie went pale. No, please don't. Message from December 8, 2024, I read aloud. Deborah, Kevin and I will be having a Christmas dinner with our friends. I think it would be better if you came another day when we have more time for you. I continued. Message from March 22, 2024. Deborah, we have important guests this weekend. Could you visit during the week when it's quieter? Each message I read created more approving murmurs from the nearby tables. Do you see the pattern? I asked the restaurant. There was always an excuse. There was always a reason why I couldn't be there when important people were around. Kevin sank into his chair, completely defeated. Mom, we thought you preferred it that way. That I preferred it. I interrupted him. That I preferred to be alone, that I preferred to be excluded from my only son's life? At that moment, the restaurant door opened, and a distinguished man in his 60s entered, carrying a leather briefcase. It was Mr. Thompson, my lawyer. Good evening, Miss Smith, he greeted me formally. I have brought the documents you requested. Kevin stood up abruptly. What documents? Mom, please don't do anything you might regret. Regret? I turned to him with a cold smile. Kevin, the only thing I regret is not having done this sooner. Mr. Thompson opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. Miss Smith, here is the new will we prepared last week, as well as the property transfer documents we discussed. Property transfer? Stephanie asked with a broken voice. Yes, I replied calmly. I have decided to bequeath my assets to charities that help elderly individuals abandoned by their families, and also to loyal employees who have shown me more respect and affection than my own blood. Anton, the waiter who had served us all evening, timidly stepped closer. Miss Smith, are you sure you want to do this in front of so many people? I smiled genuinely at him. Anton, for 5 years you have been kinder to me than my own son. You have always treated me with respect, no matter how I was dressed or how much money you thought I had. Anton blushed slightly. You've always been a very elegant lady, Miss Smith, and you always give the best tips. Tips? Kevin looked at me confused. What tips? Anton replied, your mother always leaves $100 tips, young man, and she always asks about our families, about our problems. She's the most generous and kindest customer we have. Kevin opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Obviously, this was another revelation he hadn't expected. Exactly, I confirmed. All these years, while you thought I was living on barely $800 a month, I was helping financially struggling employees, donating to charities and supporting families in need. Stephanie murmured, how much money have you donated in the last 5 years? Approximately $1 million for various causes, I replied. Money I could have used for a luxurious life, but which I preferred to use to help others. Spontaneous applause erupted from several tables. The guests clearly applauded my philanthropic deeds. While you were ashamed of my poverty, I continued, I used my money to do good. While you excluded me because I wasn't sophisticated enough, I was more generous than you ever were. Kevin stood up desperately. Mom, this is all well and good, but I'm your son. I'm your only family. You can't give all your money to strangers. Strangers? I laughed. Kevin, Anton knows me better than you. Mr. Brand respects me more than you. The employees of my restaurants have shown me more affection in the last 5 years than you have. I turned to Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, please prepare everything. I want to sign the new will tonight. No. Kevin cried, trying to approach the table where the documents lay. You can't do that. I'm your son. I have rights. Mr. Brand intervened firmly. Young man, please compose yourself. Ms. Smith has every right to dispose of her assets as she sees fit. This is madness. Stephanie began to cry hysterically. Deborah, Kevin made a mistake, but he doesn't deserve to lose his entire inheritance. I stopped a few steps before the table where the documents lay, and slowly turned to Stephanie. You call 5 years of constant humiliation a mistake? Mr. Thompson placed the documents on the main table, where everyone could see them. Miss Smith, before we proceed, I must ask you. Are you absolutely certain of this decision? Once signed, these documents are legally binding. Mr. Thompson, I replied with a firm voice. I have never been so sure in my life. Kevin ran to the table, but Mr. Brand and 2 waiters gently but firmly held him back. Mom, wait. Give me a chance to explain. Give me a chance to change. A chance. I turned to him in disbelief. Kevin, you had 5 years of opportunities. Every time you excluded me from an event was a missed opportunity. Every time you were ashamed of me was a missed opportunity. Stephanie stood up, swaying slightly. Deborah, please think rationally about this. If you take Kevin's inheritance, you're also punishing your future grandchildren. A sad smile flickered across my face. My future grandchildren, Stephanie, you've been married for 3 years. How often have you included me in conversations about children? How often have you made me feel that I would be a welcome grandmother? Stephanie couldn't answer. The truth is, I continued, you don't want me to be part of your future children's lives. You don't want a poor, uneducated grandmother influencing the upbringing of your successful children. A murmur of understanding went through the entire restaurant. The guests clearly saw the logic in my words. Dr. Thompson opened the document folder. Ms. Smith, here are the new documents. The will divides your assets among 5 charities and 10 employees of your restaurants who have shown exceptional loyalty. Kevin tried to come closer again, but this time his voice was pleading. Mom, please, at least leave me a small portion. Not everything, but something, a chance to prove to you that I can change. I held the pen in my hand. A small portion, so you can continue to live comfortably without learning anything from this experience?
No.
Kevin protested, so I can prove to you that I've learned my lesson, so I can regain your forgiveness. Stephanie stepped up to me with tears in her eyes. Deborah, give him a chance. Set conditions for him. Let him earn your forgiveness. I looked at my son, who stood there with red eyes and a contrite face. For the first time in years, I saw genuine vulnerability in him, not the superficial arrogance he had shown for so long. Conditions, I repeated slowly. What kind of conditions? Kevin's face brightened with hope. Whatever you want, Mom, anything. I'll do whatever it takes. Mr. Thompson looked at me questioningly. Miss Smith, would you like to explore this option? We can draft a conditional will. I slowly walked around the tables, considering the possibilities. The entire restaurant was in absolute silence, waiting for my decision. Very well, I finally said. If you truly want a chance, Kevin, here are my conditions. Kevin nodded desperately. Yes, anything. First condition, I announced clearly, so the entire restaurant could hear. For the next year, you and Stephanie will work every single weekend, without exception, at a nursing home. Stephanie opened her mouth to protest, but Kevin stopped her. I accept. What else? Second condition, I continued. You will move out of your big house and live on a budget of $1,500 per month. The same budget you thought I had. Kevin went pale. But Mom, my mortgage, my expenses. What, Kevin? Can you not live on the budget you considered appropriate for your own mother? The comment elicited a few nervous chuckles from nearby tables. Third condition, I continued. You will work part-time as a waiter in one of my restaurants. You will learn what it's like to serve others and to treat people from all walks of life with respect. As a waiter? Stephanie asked, horrified. But Kevin is a regional manager. Exactly, I replied, and it's time he learned humility. Kevin took a deep breath. I accept. Is there more? Fourth condition, I said, you will write public letters of apology. A letter to the local newspaper apologizing for your behavior towards elderly people. A letter to your company taking responsibility for your lack of family values. Kevin's face lost all color. Mom, that will ruin my career. Your career. I laughed. Kevin, after what happened here tonight, your career is already ruined. This, at least, gives you a chance to save it with dignity. Mr. Miller, Kevin's colleague, stood up. Excuse me, Miss Smith, but I must tell you that the company is already considering suspending Kevin. His behavior tonight violates all our corporate values. Kevin turned desperately to him. Mr. Miller, please. I'm sorry, Kevin, Mr. Miller replied firmly. Our company values family respect and personal integrity. What we've seen here tonight is unacceptable. I turned to Kevin. You see, your career is already in jeopardy. My conditions at least give you a way to rehabilitate yourself. And the fifth condition? Kevin asked with a broken voice. The fifth condition is the most important, I said solemnly. For an entire year you and Stephanie will visit me every week. Not because I have money, but because I am your mother. You will spend time with me, truly get to know me, learn who I am as a person. Stephanie murmured, That doesn't sound so hard. No, I turned to her. Stephanie, when was the last time you had a real conversation with me? A conversation where you asked me about my dreams, my fears, my life experiences. Stephanie couldn't answer. And do you know what the sixth condition is? I added. Sixth? Kevin asked nervously. If you fail to meet any of these conditions during this probationary year, or if you show that you are only acting for the money, the original will be automatically reinstated. All the money will go to charity. Mr. Thompson nodded. That is perfectly legal, Ms. Smith. We can draft a conditional will with those specifications. Kevin looked at Stephanie, who nodded reluctantly. I accept all the conditions, Mom. I accept them completely. Good, I said, taking the pen. But there's one more thing I need to say before I sign any documents. The entire restaurant held its breath. What happened here tonight cannot be undone. The words you spoke, the humiliation you inflicted upon me, the pain you caused me, that is already part of our history. Kevin nodded, tears in his eyes. I know, Mom, I know, and I'm so sorry. Don't say you're sorry, I replied firmly. Prove it to me. Prove to me over the next year that you've truly learned something from this experience. I turned to Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, please prepare the conditional will with all the conditions I have stated. Certainly, Ms. Smith, he replied, and began to write. As the lawyer prepared the documents, I turned one last time to the entire restaurant. Ladies and gentlemen, you have witnessed a very important lesson tonight. You have seen what happens when people value money more than respect, when they confuse material success with human worth. Applause erupted from one table and spread throughout the restaurant. It was applause of approval, of respect, of admiration for the way I had handled the situation. I hope, I continued, that you will all remember this evening when you interact with your own families. I hope you remember that respect and love have no admission price. The applause grew louder. Some people stood up, giving me a standing ovation. Kevin timidly stepped up to me. Mom, can I hug you? I looked at him for a long time. Kevin, hugs are something one earns. Over the next year, you will have to earn every hug, every smile, every moment of affection. He nodded, finally understanding the extent of what he had lost. 6 months after that evening, which changed everything, I sat at the same table in the Gilded Lily. But the atmosphere was completely different this time. There was no tension, no shouting, no humiliation. There was just an elderly woman watching her son work as a waiter in her own restaurant. Kevin approached my table with a tray in his hands. He wore the restaurant's black uniform. His face no longer showed arrogance or shame. There was something new in his eyes. Genuine humility. Good evening, Miss Smith, he said with a smile that, for the first time in years, seemed genuine. What would you like to order tonight? I smiled, but maintained my composure. Kevin, how was your day? Difficult, he admitted, and sat down in the chair opposite me when I signaled him. One customer yelled at me because his soup was too hot. Another complained because it took me 30 seconds to bring him water. And one lady treated me as if I were invisible. And how did that make you feel? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Kevin lowered his gaze, terrible, humiliated, like I wasn't a whole person. He looked up at me. Like you must have felt all those years. It was the first time in months that he directly admitted the parallel between his current experience and the way he had treated me. It was progress. And Stephanie? I asked. How is she coping with the changes? Better than I expected, Kevin replied. Honestly, at first she complained a lot about the small apartment, the limited budget, and the volunteer work at the nursing home. But a few weeks ago, something changed. She met an elderly lady named Helena. Her children abandoned her 5 years ago. She hasn't received a single visit all this time. Kevin paused, his eyes slightly moist. Stephanie realized that this lady would have become just like you would have become if I had continued down the same path. I exhaled, feeling a warmth in my chest. It was the first time I heard Stephanie had made a real emotional connection to the situation. Helena told Stephanie how her children only visited her when they needed money, Kevin continued, how they promised to come to dinner but always made excuses at the last minute, how she felt invisible in her own family, and that hit her. Stephanie cried all night after that conversation. She told me she finally understood why you did what you did. She said we had turned you into Helena. Mr. Brand discreetly approached our table.
MS. Smith, forgive the interruption.
Mr. Kevin has been an excellent employee. He's always on time, treats everyone with respect, and customers speak positively about his service. Kevin blushed slightly at the praise. Thank you, Mr. Brand. I'm learning so much. After Mr. Brand walked away, I looked intently at my son. Kevin, may I ask you something very honestly? Certainly, Mom. Go ahead. Are you doing all this just for the money, just for the inheritance? Kevin hesitated for a long time. It was a question I had waited for the right moment to ask. At first, he finally admitted, yes, for the first few weeks, every action I took was calculated. Every word I said was to impress you. I was playing a game to get my inheritance back. His honesty surprised me. But I asked, sensing there was more to come. But something changed when I started working here, when I really interacted with people from different walks of life, when I saw how the employees spoke about you with such affection and respect. Kevin paused. I realized that for years I had been living in a bubble of arrogance. He leaned forward, his voice growing more intense. Mom, I really got to know Anton for the first time. Did you know he has 3 children and is paying for his oldest daughter's college by working here? Did you know you secretly paid for his gallbladder surgery last year? I smiled gently. Anton is a good man, and I treated him as if he were invisible. I treated him as if he were just a waiter. But he's a hard-working father. He's an honorable man. He's someone who deserves respect. Kevin ran his hands through his hair. How could I have been so blind? And what about your career? I asked. Do you regret losing your regional manager position? Kevin laughed, but it wasn't a bitter laugh. You know what? No. And that surprises even me. Why not? Because I realized that my success was built on false values. I realized that I was so obsessed with impressing others that I lost sight of who I really am. At that moment, Stephanie entered the restaurant. She no longer wore expensive clothes or flashy jewelry. Her attire was simple but elegant, and something was different about her demeanor. She seemed more authentic. Hello, Deborah, she greeted me, and for the first time in years, her greeting sounded genuine. How are you? Fine, Stephanie. How was it at the nursing home today? Emotional, she replied, sitting next to Kevin. Helena taught me how to knit and told me stories from her youth during the war. The wisdom of these people is incredible. I saw Kevin looking at her admiringly. It was clear that these changes in Stephanie had also strengthened their relationship. Deborah, Stephanie continued. I want to apologize to you, not just for that evening at the restaurant, but for years of my terrible behavior. What exactly are you referring to? I asked. I needed to know she understood precisely what she had done wrong. I'm referring to all the times I excluded you from our lives because I thought you weren't sophisticated enough. I'm referring to all the times I made Kevin ashamed of you. I'm referring to judging your worth as a person solely based on your financial appearance. Her words sounded sincere. And now that you know I have money, how do you feel about that? Honestly. Stephanie smiled sadly. I feel like an idiot. In all the months I've worked with the elderly, I've met so many extraordinary people who live on very little money but have immense emotional riches. Kevin nodded. Mom, we've learned that true wealth has nothing to do with the money in the bank. I pulled an envelope from my purse and placed it on the table. Kevin and Stephanie looked at it curiously and a little nervously. What's that? Kevin asked. It's an evaluation, I replied. For the past 6 months, I've observed, asked questions, researched. I've spoken with your supervisors at the nursing home, with your colleagues here at the restaurant, with your neighbors in the small apartment. Stephanie went pale. An evaluation? For what? To see if your changes are genuine, or if you're just pretending to get the money. I opened the envelope and pulled out several papers. Here's the report from the head of the nursing home. It states that you not only put in your required hours but often stay longer. It states that you've built an emotional connection with the residents. Kevin and Stephanie exchanged hopeful glances. Here's Mr. Brand's report on Kevin's performance as a waiter. It states that he is respectful, diligent, and genuinely cares about the customer's experience, I continued. And here are the observations from your neighbors about how you live now. They say you're humble, that you help other residents, that you don't complain about your limited circumstances. And what's your conclusion? Stephanie asked with a trembling voice. I put the papers back in the envelope and looked them directly in the eyes. My conclusion is that you've learned your lesson. Not completely, because 6 months cannot erase 5 years of problematic behavior. But you've shown that change is possible. Kevin began to grin widely. Does that mean? That means, I said solemnly, that we will continue this process with some modifications. What kind of modifications? Stephanie asked. First, Kevin will continue to work at the restaurant, but now he'll receive a fair salary and have the opportunity to learn the business from the ground up. If he shows genuine ability and dedication, he could eventually take on a management role. Kevin nodded enthusiastically. Second, you will move into a larger apartment, but you won't revert to your previous lifestyle. You will live comfortably, but modestly. And third, I continued, we will start spending time together as a family. Real time, no acting. We will get to know each other as people. Stephanie began to cry, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for giving us this chance. Don't thank me yet, I said firmly. This is just the beginning. You must continue to prove that these changes are lasting. Kevin took my hand. Mom, I want you to know something. Even if you decide not to leave me any money, these months have been the most valuable of my life. I've learned who I truly want to be. For the first time in years, I let tears flow freely down my cheeks. You know what, Kevin? That's the only thing I ever wanted to hear from you. I stood up and looked around the restaurant, where everything had changed 6 months ago. Tonight, when those cruel words came from your mouth, I thought I had lost my son forever. But now I see that I didn't lose him. He had just been hiding beneath layers of arrogance and false values. Kevin also stood up and looked me in the eyes. Mom, can I hug you now? I smiled, remembering my words from that evening, that hugs are something one earns. Yes, my boy, you've earned this hug. As Kevin hugged me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The unconditional love of a son who finally understood his mother's worth. Not because of her money, not because of what she could give him, but because of who she was as a person. Stephanie joined the hug, and for the first time in a long time, I truly felt like I had a family. As we broke apart, I looked at the tables in the restaurant. Some of the guests who had witnessed that terrible evening were back, and some smiled at me and nodded approvingly. Do you know what the most ironic thing about all this is? I said to Kevin. What? That by losing your arrogance and greed, you've finally become someone worthy of inheriting a fortune. Kevin smiled, but it was a different smile. It was the smile of someone who had found something more valuable than money. He had found his humanity. I, Deborah Smith, had found something I thought was lost forever. I had found my son again. True wealth in the end is not measured in dollars, but in respect, in sincere love, and in the ability to see the value in every human being, regardless of what they have or don't have. That evening, as we left the restaurant for the first time in years as a true family, I knew I had made the right decision. Sometimes, to save someone you love, you first have to be willing to lose them. And sometimes, the greatest wealth you can leave your children is not money, but the lesson of how to be a good person.